Welcome to This Is Living with Josh and Aaron Hawley.
We all the time, day to day, we face those choices. Okay, today, what's going to be my priority? Today, what am I going to go after? Today, how am I going to handle the busyness and the competing demands?
Jesus tells his followers that those who come to him will have life and life abundantly, or life to the full. So that's sort of the idea that we're after.
There's a good life out there. Let's go and find it.
Hey, Josh Hawley here. Aaron, it is so good to see you for this special edition podcast.
It's great to be here.
I'm glad you said it's good to see me. I'd be a little bit worried if it weren't. It's been a while since you and I have been able to sit down and do a podcast together, but we're looking forward to launching our next season. It's coming up soon. But we have been busy, and we assure folks we have not been sitting around. Of course, there's no sitting around at our house.
Just running around.
Just running around, exactly. But we've been doing lots of things. Some of what you've been doing, we're going to talk about in terms of some of the work, in particular cases you've been litigating, and we're going to talk about that today. I've been trying to do my part, been working on a new book, which we're excited about. But this is a special edition because we've had some really huge news here just in the last week, which is that the United States Supreme Court handed down a decision on Roe versus Wade. And for the first time now since 1973, the states have the ability to determine their own laws on life. The Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade, which is an extraordinary development. I just have to ask you honestly, did you think that this is something that we would see in our lifetimes?
You know, I hope so with the current Supreme Court. But I think if you think back to 1973 and the decades that people have worked and prayed and marched, I think a lot of people didn't foresee this. Thought, this might be something that we were just stuck with, and the Supreme Court might not ever revisit Roe versus Wade. So I think it's just a tremendous legal victory and just a huge sort of praise for all of the prayers and all of the work that has gone on to this for decades.
Now, we don't usually, in our podcast, we don't usually talk about politics, and we're not going to talk about, politics per se today, but we are going to talk about this case. And one of the reasons why, besides the fact that it's hugely, hugely significant, particularly, I think, for believers. I mean, every believer in America should be celebrating this extraordinary development. I mean, this is really, I think, our abolitionist moment. I mean, you think about the long struggle in Britain and then in the United States to eliminate first the slave trade, then slavery. You think about what went into that. And this is that kind of a moment I think people should realize in terms of protecting unborn life, the most vulnerable among us. Here we have arrived at a generational moment where this case has been overturned. So that's huge, and believers should know about that. But there's a very personal angle to this for us and for you. And so that's really what we want to talk about. And we thought that folks would be interested to hear about is that you were involved in this case, and not just involved, but intimately involved. You were counsel to Mississippi in this case, overturning Roe. And so, I think this is something that obviously you've worked on, you've invested a lot of time in. It has meant a lot to our family. In a way, our whole family has been involved in it over the last year, kind of unexpectedly. So it's been big for us in a really personal way, and that's what we want to talk about and share about today. But why don't you tell us just the basics? Aaron's the workaday lawyer in the family now, so she's the real lawyer now that I've given up lawyering as my day job. But so just tell us the basics of a quick review. What did the court do in what's known as the Dobbs case, overturning Roe? I mean, just give us the baseline so that we're all on a level set.
Absolutely. So a majority of the court decided that Roe versus Wade, the decision that disallowed states from protecting life before viability, which is about 22 weeks, no matter how compelling the state's interest, no matter what scientific evidence says about a baby's development. If you take the Mississippi law at issue in Dobbs, it applies at 15 weeks. And at 15 weeks, a baby can open and close her fingers. All her organs are developed. She can hiccup, and she can quite likely feel pain. But despite all of this, despite the Mississippi's legislature saying, we want to protect life at this stage, the lower court said, no, you can't do it because such a law is unconstitutional under Roe versus Wade. And so what the Dobbs decision did is upend all of that. In sort of an amazing opinion, Justice Alito writes that if you're going to have a right, it needs to be based in the Constitution. So pretty standard stuff here.
Imagine that.
And so Justice Alito's opinion explains that there's nothing in the Constitution's text, structure, or history that has protected a right to an abortion. And in particular, he looks at all of the bases that people have come up with since Roe. And one of the interesting things about Roe is it's really hard to find anyone, any serious constitutional law scholar, who will say that Roe was rightly decided.
Can you just, I think that's an important point, and people don't, I think people don't realize that, because what we're told all the time from the media in particular is that, oh my gosh, I mean, Roe is untouchable. Roe is incontrovertible. Roe is I mean, everybody agrees with Roe. And as it turns out, actually, as you say, if you look at the scholarship, you look at the history, almost nobody thinks that Roe is rightly decided as it was written. People say, oh, well, you should have done it this way or should have done it that way. But you're hard pressed to find serious lawyers who defend Roe the way it was written. So I think that might be worth telling folks about.
Absolutely. So in the Roe decision, what the Supreme Court did was they literally invented a right. So they looked to what are called penumbras and emanations of the Constitution. They looked to 4 or 5 different amendments and said, maybe if you cobble all of those amendments together, then we can come up with this right to privacy that would protect a woman's right to choose an abortion. But the problem with that approach is it's really scary, because it gives to 9 judges, however well-meaning they may be, it allows them to choose the rights by which our country lives, rather than leaving those decisions to the democratically elected branches. So we have in Roe a decision that, as Justice Ginsburg said, usurped the democratic process in a heavy-handed judicial decision. Justice Alito calls it just a raw exercise of judicial power.
And so the Supreme Court, after 50 years, just about 50 years, the Supreme Court overturns this in the Dobbs case, and now the constitutional right, quote unquote, to an abortion that previous courts imposed on the country, a uniform rule really, is gone, and this is turned back to the people to vote on, to determine state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, as they choose. I mean, right? Have I got it basically correct?
Yep, absolutely.
So here's my next question. So the seminal case, huge moment. People in the right to life movement, and really believers in particular, have worked for this. They have prayed for this. They have sweated. They have marched. They have demonstrated. They have for 50 years. So here we are at this moment, and at the end of this, you had the opportunity to become involved and to help litigate this case, and it started a little over a year ago, right? So just tell people how. I mean, the Lord orchestrates these things. I mean, how it is that you came to be working on this case that overturned Roe versus Wade. I mean, how did that happen? How did that start?
Yeah, well, it's just an amazing privilege and honor. And as you said, only something that God could orchestrate. So after we had our 3rd child, Abigail, I went to work for the Alliance Defending Freedom. And Alliance Defending Freedom is a nonprofit law firm that protects religious liberty and parental rights, those sorts of things. And so Alliance Defending Freedom has obviously been hugely involved in the pro-life space for decades. This was one of their generational wins, is the hope and goal to overrule Roe versus Wade. So Alliance Defending Freedom has been supporting Mississippi. They helped with the legislation back in 2018. They helped.
When you say the legislation, they helped write Mississippi's law that was challenged in this case. The one that said that after no abortions after 15 weeks.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. The
Okay,
Gestational Age Act. So they helped with that. They helped defend the law below. I think they represented the governor in the lower courts in the Fifth Circuit. And so then when the Supreme Court kind of surprisingly grants cert in Dobbs.
And that means what?
The Supreme Court decided to review the case. So again, to go back to the point that sort of no one thought Roe was really on the table, the lower courts had uniformly struck down any sort of law like Mississippi's. There was absolutely no disagreement in the lower courts.
And that happened in this case too, right?
Yep.
So Mississippi passes a law that says no abortions after 15 weeks for the reasons you talked about, because the baby is well along in her development. She may well be able to feel pain. There's all kinds of, and we know science has changed, right? And part of this in 50 years, I mean, there's been a lot of scientific developments, and we know a lot more about early fetal life than we did in 1973. So we know a lot more about where the baby is, what she can do, and her development. So based on that, right, 15, okay, no, after 15 weeks, that's Mississippi's law. It, of course, immediately gets taken to court.
Same day.
Same day. Right. And the courts strike it down and say, well, we have to because of Roe versus Wade. And then the U.S. Supreme Court says, in a surprise, you know what, actually, we'll review that case.
Yes, which was huge news, sort of rocked the legal world, and this exciting potential that the Supreme Court might really be willing to reconsider Roe versus Wade.
And that was about this time last year, right? When the court said, you know what, actually, we'll review the Mississippi
or two years ago.
2 years ago. We'll review the Mississippi case.
Yep, exactly. And so then I think it was in April, and so a team from ADF went down to meet with Mississippi, see what we could do to continue to help with their efforts. And it was at that point, actually, I've got to tell the story because it's Abigail was about 6 months old, our youngest child and daughter at the time. And so a team from ADF went down to Mississippi to see how we could continue to assist them with the defense of their law, the Gestational Age Act. And ADF has been so good to women attorneys about allowing them to take kids with them on work trips so that they're able to both be a fully mom and also to be engaged in these important legal issues. So Abigail and I get on a plane, I should say, really early in the morning. We navigate the, changing of the planes in Atlanta, end up in Mississippi, are rushing to make this meeting. Our babysitter hasn't yet arrived, and Abigail.
And Abby, remind us. Abby, you just said is how old again?
She's about 6 months. Yeah. So yes, Josh can remember. So she's always sort of been in charge, and so Abigail really needs a nap. But there's no time to check in, no time to get her a nap. But mercifully, she falls asleep in the stroller as we're finding the meeting room. And so I just park her in the corner right next to me, and we start to dive into legal discussion and, what's the best way to proceed in this case? What can we offer? What can ADF offer as a team? And not too long after we sat down and started to strategize, Abigail wakes up, and she is not happy. So she is screaming bloody murder. And so I'm trying to comfort her at the same time about talking about these cases in Roe and what some of the dissents had said post-Roe and what the Supreme Court might actually be willing to do in this case and the views of the different justices, all while holding this screaming child. But I really treasure that memory, and the reason being is that Abigail was just a tangible reminder of why the Dobbs case might matter so much. Here was this amazing cherubic, red curly-haired girl screaming at the top of her lungs. But, she's not actually any more unique or any more loved by God than any other child that he has ever created. And that just really brought home to me the impact that this case could have. And that Dobbs could allow states like Mississippi to say, no, we value each and every one of these children that God has created. So just love that reminder.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this is last spring, right? Spring of 2021 that you were down there with Mississippi. The Supreme Court has said we're going to hear this case at this point. So you're talking with Mississippi about, okay, how might we defend this law? What might that look like? Now, you have some experience at the U.S. Supreme Court, right?
So yes, I clerked along with you for Chief Justice
that's
Roberts.
Your own experience, but I wasn't fishing for that, but yes, we did meet at the court and dated at the court, got married after. But my point is that you worked at the court, but then you've litigated there.
Yes, I've had the chance to work for some really great law firms and partners and litigated routinely before the United States Supreme Court.
So you know the court well, and what were you thinking? You were surprised that the court reached out and said, you know what, we're going to hear this Mississippi case. You said that a second ago, I think, but surprised you. So that's kind of interesting, I think. Why did it surprise you? You're somebody who knows this court pretty well. You know the justices on the court, and when the court said, yeah, actually, you know what, we're going to hear the Mississippi case. We want to review that case. What was surprising about that to you? I mean, what grabbed your attention?
So the court didn't have to take it. There was no disagreement among the lower courts. Roe and Casey and subsequent cases were crystal clear that states, again, no matter what science showed about a baby's development, no matter how compelling a state's interest in protecting life, they had no option to protect unborn children until 22 or thereabouts, until viability. And so there was no disagreement. So the court could have easily passed on the case and just said, there's no lower court split. There's no reason to disturb our prior precedent. And yet, the grant of the Supreme Court's of review in Dobbs suggested that there were at least 4, probably 5 members of that court that were unhappy with the decision in Roe versus Wade for obvious reasons. But that was a major shift. The Supreme Court has had some abortion cases in the past few years, but those have been cases that have sort of nibbled at the margins. What does the undue burden test mean? Can states impose consent requirements, or do they have to have a judicial bypass to get around a parental consent for minors? Those sorts of things. So the court has not in 30 years addressed the argument whether Roe versus Wade should be overruled.
The substance of it.
Yes, and this case squarely presented that. So it was a huge surprise and a great day when the Supreme Court decided we're going to take a look.
So there's 9 justices on the court, and it takes 4 of them in order to say, I want to hear a case, right? Mm-hmm. So that when a case gets granted, when they say, okay, we're going to hear it, at least 4 of them have voted yes. Mm-hmm. Can be more, of course, but it's got to be at least 4. But this case, when they reached out to take it, like you said, that was a pretty good sign, a surprising one, but a pretty good sign that they maybe wanted to uphold Mississippi's law.
Absolutely.
Right? And then the question became, well, how would they do it? How far would they go? Would they go all the way and overrule Roe or not? So I want to get to that, but before we get there, though, let's pick back up your story. So you're down in Mississippi. You got Happy, the boss. You and the boss are in Mississippi. Then Mississippi brings you on as counsel on this case, right? They reach out and they say, we want... and by the way, this would be a good point to give a lot of credit to Attorney General Lynn Finch down in Mississippi. Attorney General Finch it took a lot of bravery to argue this case the way that they did, and I'm former Attorney General myself in the state of Missouri, and it's your job to defend your state's laws, and so she did that, obviously, but she made the very bold choice to really defend this one all the way and to ask the court to overrule Roe, and she didn't have to do that, right? So she chose to do that. So I think people should know that, Lynn Finch showed a tremendous amount of courage here, and if she hadn't have made that decision, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. Maybe they would have won the case, but it wouldn't have overruled Roe. She said, no, we're going to ask them to overrule Roe, which was a big decision. So Lynn and her team say, we want Aaron to come be part of the team and to help us on this case and to work on it. So you then, I remember you and I talked about this. You had a choice to make, because obviously, you didn't have to do that. But you really thought about it, thought, is this something that I really want? Because you knew it would be a heavy lift in terms of it's going to take a gob of your time. You're going to have to focus on this. It's a huge case. The United States Supreme Court, it's Roe versus Wade. So why did you decide, I'm going to do this. I'm going to join that team. I'm going to make this pretty much the focus of what I am doing in terms of, any kind of litigation. I'm going to make this the focus of my next year and really go all in on this while you've got, a newborn and then our
busy husband,
a busy husband, and then our two rambunctious boys. Yeah, exactly. The wild child. So why did you do that? Why did you go all in on it?
So I think for a lot of those reasons, just that you were describing, we did have that 6-month-old that really just showed us both, the value of life and our 2 boys. And, something we've talked about in Josh, following your calling into politics, is sort of the idea that we can tell our kids that, when God called, when the opportunity presented itself, we were willing to take that step, even though there might be some hard things along with it. And so when the opportunity came to join the team on a case that might overrule Roe, it's sort of the project of a lifetime, especially as a mom. Like, it would have been exciting to work on that case at any point in my career, but I think especially so when we had 3 young children. That just made it so the point of Dobbs so tangible to me. So,
listening to you talk makes me think about the link between or maybe it's the difference between career and calling. And for you, doing what you do, a mom of 3, a wife, you're a Supreme Court litigator. You could do a lot of things with your time, but you've chosen, when it comes to working on these cases, particularly religious liberty cases, which is how you spend most of your time these days as a lawyer, you've chosen to pursue things where you really think, hey, this is where the Lord has me to make a difference. So I just think it'd be interesting because a lot of your process, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I remember it, a lot of your process of decision making, in this case of thinking about, is this something that I want to really, focus in on? This is pretty much all I'm going to do as a lawyer for the next year. Was about, is this what I feel called to do? Does this advance the calling I feel like the Lord has on my life? So would you share about that? Because I think that's interesting. I think people would be interested to hear. It's a lot of folks, I think, struggle with that. How do I know what my calling is? Or what does this look like to process through that? So I just wonder, what did that look like for you as you're thinking on this in a very tangible way? It's not a theory. Is this what I'm going to give myself to as a lawyer for the next year? How did you think about that in terms of your sense of calling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's tricky because it can be kind of hard to know what it is that God is calling us to. But for me, we've been through a series of changes and job changes and those sorts of things in the last couple of years. And I think what the Lord has really impressed upon me is that part of our calling is just to recognize what it is that's right in front of us. And for me, most importantly, and especially that's our kiddos and being a wife. But he's also brought these other amazing opportunities. And the verses, to pray for the city in which you're in, and just to work with excellence. I just really think that at least in this season of my life, God is calling me to pay attention to what's in front of me, and to go all in on that. So I think, it was a sort of just a dream come true to work on a case like this, but especially in the context of having a family.
Yeah. So you start in on the case then. By this time, it's like what? It's last summer, approximately?
Yeah.
And you dive in, and then begins kind of the long, hard work behind the scenes that nobody sees, but where the work is really done, where you have to think about, okay, we're going to go and defend this thing before the United States Supreme Court, but how are we going to defend it? I mean, what are we going to say? How are we going to put it together? And how are we going to make it? Well, it's kind of like, baking the cake, right? It's like, oh yeah, the cake looks great at the end. We all eat it, but it took a lot to get to that point. And that's the phase you went into then for months. And, what was during that time as you're doing that, and you're still doing all of your other things, you're still getting the kids ready for school and picking them up, and you're still, you and I are still doing our thing, and we're still going about our lives together. But what was your mentality during that time, and how did you keep yourself focused and encouraged, during this time when nobody's looking at this time? I mean, nobody is. This is where, you just gotta put your head down and get the work done. And there are not a lot of cheerleaders around because nobody really knows what's going on. So how did you kind of work through that time period and forming these arguments and working with that team in Mississippi?
Absolutely. So I think that the initial call, as you mentioned, was the really important strategic decision of how to defend Mississippi's law. So there were two sort of basic paths. And one path, actually supported by a lot of really good conservative lawyers, was sort of to take an incremental approach and to tell the court, you don't have to overrule Roe. You can sort of go about it and just uphold Mississippi's law. You can change the standard a little bit, but leave in place Roe. And one thing I really appreciated about Mississippi's team and the Solicitor General Scott Stewart is he was committed to representing the people in Mississippi. And he reminded us time and again that the people in Mississippi had voted for pro-life laws over and over again. And in fact, 55% of the voters in Mississippi are women. And those women choose to protect life. And so he was steadfast that we needed to ask the Supreme Court to overrule Roe versus Wade, and sort of make them confront the reality that the Roe decision was so egregiously wrong and caused so many harms to democracy. So that was sort of the first strategic call. And then there's just, gobs of work reading every possible opinion in the Supreme Court, all of the concurrences, all the dissents. Some of these are really long opinions, and sort of coming up with the best possible theory, not only for why Roe was wrong, because that's pretty easy, honestly, but also why the court shouldn't stick to it. So a lot of people say, okay, fine, Roe was wrong strong as an initial matter, but it's been on the books for almost 50 years. Women have come to rely on it, those sorts of things. And so we had to make the case that, yes, it's egregiously wrong, and also it's harmful. It harms democracy, it harms our court system, and it doesn't help women either.
Yeah. And so you went through that process and did that, and you came out with the bold position that Roe should be overruled. I mean, that's what you asked the court to do.
Yep.
Not just uphold Mississippi's law at 15 weeks, but just overrule the whole thing. That was controversial, as you said, for a lot of reasons, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, people who supported Roe versus Wade thought it was very controversial. But as you said, some folks who are pro-life generally thought strategically, they're like, wow, that's a lot. Like you're not because they didn't want it to happen, but they just thought, whoa, is the court really going to be ready to do this? And you're really biting off a lot here by asking them to go the whole way, and overturn it. So that was big. I'm just curious, in your mind, at what point did you think in this process, did you think, what? The court might actually do it. They might actually overrule the whole thing and give this issue to the people. I mean, when did you think that might really be, when was it real to you? Like, oh, wow, like we could get there on this.
So I think we were hopeful initially because the Supreme Court now has 5, maybe 6 justices who are committed to originalism. And this idea that when the Constitution doesn't grant a right, then that should be left to the states and the people. So we were hopeful from the beginning. But I think it really crystallized on December 1st, 2021, when the Supreme Court heard oral argument. And it was amazing. The Supreme Court really took on board the idea that Roe was wrong and should be discarded. I think we were particularly watching 3 of the justices who hadn't had an opportunity to explain their views on abortion as much.
Which ones were those? Yeah, go ahead.
Justices Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett, and the Chief Justice. And the questions for all 3 of them were outstanding. Justice Kavanaugh, I think 3 times mentioned that the Constitution is silent on abortion, so the court should be, quote, scrupulously neutral. He and Justice Barrett both pointed out that some of the court's best decisions have been those that overruled prior precedent. So if you think about Brown versus Board, for example, that case overruled Plessy versus Ferguson's separate but equal doctrine. And everyone acknowledges that Brown versus Board is one of the Supreme Court's greatest decisions.
And Plessy, by the way, was
Yes.
an old case,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Plessy's
Had been
the case
upheld time and again.
Yeah, Plessy's the
Yes.
case that says segregation is fine and dandy.
Yep.
Do whatever you want. That was a 19th century case.
Yep.
And by the time we get to Brown, it had been on the books a long time. Like you said, it had been repeatedly affirmed.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so the Supreme Court overruled that, and Justice Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh pointed out, these are good things for the Supreme Court to overrule really wrong decisions. Justice Barrett also pointed out that there's safe haven laws in every state now. So,
Yeah, and what are those?
So they're adoption laws that if a mother is unable to care for her child, she can give it to the state, no questions asked, and it's just sort of an adoption procedure that's really easy for a mother in need. So Justice Barrett, said, this takes away a lot of the so-called burden of Roe. And something to realize about Roe is it takes a really dim view of women and motherhood. The 7 men in the majority in that case said that motherhood, quote, force upon women a, quote, distressful life and future. And I imagine that didn't sit too well with Justice Barrett.
How does it sit with you?
Not too well. But Justice Barrett, mom of 7, Supreme Court justice, or us, mom of 3, working on this case. And so I think that's just is wrong and demeaning to suggest that women need abortion in order to live happy, successful, and fulfilling lives. So you got that sense from the oral argument. And even the Chief Justice, he noted that American abortion law is like the law of North Korea and China. There are only 6 countries in the world that allow abortion up until the moment before birth. And under Roe, we are one of those. And so the chief was appalled by that and clearly signaled that he was interested in at least upholding Mississippi's law. So December 1st was a really exciting day.
So that's the day that that you think, like, oh wow, this might actually happen. And then there's the long wait,
Yep.
From December 1st until the end of June, and of course a lot of controversy in the midst of that. We have the unprecedented leak of a Supreme Court opinion. You and I have worked at that court, never seen anything like that before.
No, it's egregious.
Sad. I hope that'll never happen again. But and then what we finally get the decision, and it does what you asked for. It overrules Roe. How did you feel when it was announced? It was a Friday, Friday morning, like about 10:15 Eastern time. You were with the kids, right? Because I remember you and I were actually texting back and forth. Like, I wonder if it'll be today. And then about 2 minutes later, it was like, it's out. The decision's out. So you were driving the kids back from. I think you'd been out riding the horse, right? You've been out for a horseback ride in the morning. So
yeah, it'd been a super busy week, so we hadn't managed to squeeze that in. So we went for an early morning ride.
Yeah. And it was going to be a hot day, so you did it in the morning. So you're on the way back with all the kids in the car, in the van, and then you hear that it's out and they've overruled Roe. How did you feel in that moment?
I think it's just, I'm not sure it's actually sunk in yet. As you mentioned at the beginning, people have worked and prayed and marched for decades on this. I was talking with a colleague the other day, and he mentioned that his mother-in-law and her friends have been working at a local pregnancy care center for something like 30 years.
Wow.
And praying all the time that the Supreme Court would revisit and overrule Roe versus Wade. So I think it's an incredible moment for our country. It's an incredible moment for the court in setting right a horrible decision. And it's an incredible sort of call, a rallying cry to all of us as pro-life believers to come alongside these women who need some help and to facilitate a flourishing life for them and their children. It's just an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. We probably should thank the people. I mean, you talk about folks who worked at the pregnancy care centers, and we know many folks who have done that, whether they've volunteered their time, whether they've donated clothing or goods or their financial resources to pregnancy care centers. People who have offered to help women who are in distress, who they think financially, I don't know if I can afford to have a baby. Maybe abortion's my only choice. We know people who have said, I'll help you. I'll help pay for your medical care. I'll help you through this process. So there are so many folks, not just for the last few months, not just for the last few years, but for 50 years, who have been doing this day in and day out. Some of them publicly, some of them not, most of them not publicly at all, in terms of people don't know about it. They're never going to get any press for it, but they're doing it because they love the Lord. They think that the Lord loves life, which he does, that every life is valuable, which it is, no matter who you are, where you're from, what your background is, but the Lord loves you, loves your life, has a plan for your life, and that meant that life was worth saving, and life was worth fighting for. So we just want to say thank you. Thank you for those people who kept the faith all of these years. It's been an extraordinary journey for 50 years, and here we are. So, I mean, it's really just amazing. It's just amazing.
Absolutely. And like you said, for decades, people have been praying. And Mike Ferris, the president and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom, mentioned something on December 1st. He said, 49 years comes right before a Jubilee. And a Jubilee is this idea in the Old Testament of this freedom from slavery and from bondage. And all of this prayer and work that has gone in by ordinary people every day on a daily basis has given rise to the Supreme Court opinion that is a Jubilee, that releases America from sort of the shackles of Roe and the pro-abortion culture, and gives us an opportunity to embrace life, which is tremendously exciting.
Yeah, and releases us, like you said, from the ignominy, frankly, of being with China and North Korea in terms of our abortion laws that everybody's forced to follow. I mean, this is the thing. It wasn't as if like, oh, well, I don't want to be like China. Well, I want to protect life. Oh, no, not under Roe.
Yep.
No.
Not Mississippi, not Missouri.
No, don't have the option. Don't have the choice. Nobody has a choice. I mean, the Supreme Court will tell you what the law is going to be. And if they want it to be like North Korea, it'll be like North Korea. But that's over now, which is extraordinary. There's so much more that we want to talk about here with this. I mean, there's just so much exciting things, so many exciting things to talk about. So let's do another episode.
Let's do it.
Well, thanks for joining us for This is Living with Josh and Aaron Hawley. Life can be more. Don't settle for less. Join us next time for a fresh episode. And until then, we'd love to hear from you. You can connect with us by visiting joshhawley.com and sign up for our email list. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And most importantly, share this podcast with a friend and leave us a review on Google Play or Apple Podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening to This is Living.
There's a good life out there. Let's go and find it. Paid for by Josh Hawley for Senate. Approved by Josh Hawley.